have Henry Sias. Henry recently ran for the Court of Common Pleas. He's originally from Michigan, grew up primarily in South Detroit, went to Western Michigan State, is that right?
Western Michigan University.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Western Michigan University. And then went on to go to Yale Law School, after which he clerked for 2 state Supreme Court justices here in Pennsylvania, and has then gone on to clerk for 2 trial-level judges in the Court of Common Pleas here in Philadelphia. So one of the reasons why Henry is very knowledgeable about the process of judicial review and how the courts work, Malecki's going to give us kind of an insider scoop on that, because as a clerk, he's essentially worked for years as the right hand of a judge. So a lot of those opinions and a lot of those things that come out from judges' chambers are actually not written by judges. They're written by these magical elves that work in the chambers called law clerks. It is often a very thankless task, I think, and it's one that's definitely underappreciated. But with that, I present to you Henry Sias.
So I do have a fair amount of experience working in the state court system. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state courts and the federal courts and how they interact and what we should be expecting of all of these systems. I feel like if we had planned this a year ago, I would feel very differently about what I was saying. It's sort of like what I said when I was on the campaign trail, where I thought, I'm going to be running for a judge, and like it'll be super low turnout because Seth will just be running for re-election, and we'll all be vigorously patting ourselves on the back for electing our first female president, so everybody's going to stay home, and then a few things changed. So, right now, I think we're relying on and increasingly looking toward some checks and balances within the government and outside of government, for instance, the press, to sort of reassure us about the autocratic direction that it seems like the executive branch is moving into. So we have to. It's sort of like the car is seeming like it's getting out of control. I sure hope the brakes work. And as it turns out, as a system, the justice system is very, very old. And so maybe that's a good thing. It means it's survived all this time, different types of governments, monarchies and democracies. And so that's sort of confidence engaging. But on the other hand, it's not really designed as a democratic space. And so it's not like radically incompatible with a more autocratic government. So it's a little scary on the other hand. So these are just some sort of political philosophy questions raised by what's happening right now. So I expect the courts will get a vigorous workout in the next 4 years. We're going to be talking a lot about judicial review and about the supremacy clause and about what it means for states and the federal government to be in conflict and what it means for them to interpret the law differently. Later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the sanctuary city thing. I hate that name. And how it sort of fits in with some of the deeper concepts of what a legal system is and how it works. But these are all very old questions, and it's sort of like the question of money in a marriage. It comes up again and again and again and again. You have to keep renegotiating it as you go, and that's part of the function of government. So one of the more upsetting things to me about the president is that he seems to have very little respect for the court system, and it just doesn't feel bound very much by the rule of law. And I think in the past we had presidents who, even when they did something that was disturbing, like defying down torture, they would go to great lengths to do it in a way that was going to hold up in court. Whereas now I feel like there's almost an attitude of like, oh, that doesn't count, and that's sort of disturbing to me. But that should be just as visible to the judges and justices of all of the courts as it is to me. I'm sure it's just as disturbing to them. So we might hear from them a little bit in the next 4 years. Judicial review is a very old concept. It's been around since at least the Enlightenment. There was a guy named Montesquieu, who is a French philosopher who was really popular with Madison and that gang. So when they were writing up a lot of the state constitutional documents and our Constitution, they were looking at Montesquieu's ideas about checks and balances. The basic features of the Enlightenment, just in case it's been a while since you took, a class on the Enlightenment.
18th century philosophy?
Yeah, as one does. So here I am going to use my notes. Government founded upon the consent of the governed. Political ideals of freedom and equality, both as an aspect of the basic human experience and as a necessary baseline in an adequate legal system. The articulation of a list of basic human rights, sort of thought of as almost a property. It's a very propertized way of thinking about human relations, but sort of a characteristic of the time. Toleration of religious diversity, concept of basic political powers in a system of checks and balances, like I said, and suffrage for rational subjects, which was a very contested terrain, but one that we've sort of kept contesting usefully. But the concept of court is way older than the Enlightenment. So if you think about Game of Thrones, for instance, when you're in the presence of King Joffrey and he's sitting on the weird thing made out of all the swords, you are at court at that moment. So being at court means in the presence of the sovereign. And as monarchies became more complex and started to incorporate systems that would look to us like the administrative state, it got to be too much for the King Joffreys of France and England to do themselves, and plus they had squash to play or whatever. So they would get some of their dad's buddies around and put them in robes and funny headgear and say, okay, you're gonna be me. But I think the original, if I've got this right, the original name for the Court of Common Pleas in England is the Court of Common Pleas in the presence of the king. So even though the king wasn't there, in the name is the king's presence is evoked, and that's what it means to be at court. So it's a super old system, and there are these weird signs of this old legacy that we retain, for instance, the president is just Mr. President. It's not very creative. It's like Mr. Bill. But even the lowliest traffic judge is called Your Honor. And if you deviate from that, woe betide you. They wear black robes. In some countries, they still have horsehair wigs. And many states, including Pennsylvania, have something called King's Bench jurisdiction, which always struck me as pretty weird because we haven't had a king for a while, and it seems like a big deal. We got rid of that and made it illegal to even acknowledge anyone having a title like that. So it's weird that all these states have something called King's Bench jurisdiction, but it's a common law concept that we brought over from England, which basically is emergency martial law for courts. So the King's Bench jurisdiction basically says if there's some sort of justice emergency in the interest of justice, even on the court's own motion, which means even without being asked to intercede, the court has the power to intercede in a case. So that's a very broad, very expansive power. And it's a very old thing. So even juries actually come way before democracy. Although they sort of started with democracy. The first juries, I think, are in ancient Greece. So one of the first things I learned in Civ Pro, which is one of the classes that you have to take during your first semester of law school when your life is being systematically destroyed and you come into a new oneness with caffeine and a new two-ness with your partner, a new separatedness. Federal courts are courts of limited subject matter jurisdiction. So there's two ways. A lot of our language of government is from French because of the Norman invasion of England. Even the word government is pretty Francophile, right? So jurisdiction is a pretty Frenchy, French sounding word. I'm going to say, I don't speak French, but I'm just going to say that's French-ish. And so the concept of jurisdiction is usually spoken of in two contexts. One is personal jurisdiction, which obviously the federal courts have very broad personal jurisdiction because it's pretty much every person in the United States would be subject to the federal courts. So because of the very broad personal jurisdiction, the idea that the framers had was that, well, we have to limit the subject matter jurisdiction in a way that's going to make this not tyranny, put another incorporation of checks and balances into the system. There was an idea of having sort of laboratories of democracy. Each state would have its own approach to how to, what to penalize with criminal penalties and how fast you can drive, stuff like that. And the idea was that if we had all these different laboratories of democracy, the best systems would emerge, and all of the states would be like, oh yeah, that obviously works better. Let's do that. That's why our country is so great and everything's cool. Don't worry about it. So that was the idea. Jurisdiction, it becomes politicized in a lot of different contexts. So one of the contexts that we were talking a lot about while I was in law school, because I think it was like a hot political move 10 years earlier, was that some conservatives threatened to pass a law saying that federal courts were no longer going to have any jurisdiction over abortion. We're just going to leave it to the states. And so there were a lot of questions about would that be constitutional? Because theoretically speaking, it's for Congress to decide the extent of the jurisdiction of the federal courts. But it's also, the right to access medical services, including abortion, has been rooted in the fundamental individual rights in the Bill of Rights. So those two ideas were a little bit in friction. And then they just never, it was like one of those bluffs that they never, thank God. That would have been a real mess. But another context in which that's come up was the idea of states' rights, which is a phrase that's used when historically talking about states either actively oppressing usually people of color, women and people of color, or looking the other way and failing to prosecute terrorist acts of like racist violence. So during the heyday of the KKK in the South, jurisdictions would just like not prosecute after horrible acts of violence. So the federal government put pressure on the states saying basically you have to do it or else we'll come in and do it for you. And there's going to be like federal agents in your towns, and it's almost going to be like a reoccupation of the territory, like after the Civil War. And so obviously there was a lot of friction over that, and states' rights became this code word for get the federal government out of our like local systems. Well now, and then of course the right was very much in favor of keep the federal government out of our local justice systems. Now that the federal government wants to enlist by force local police forces in enforcing federal immigration law, the right is all in favor. So it's almost like it wasn't about states' rights, or something else was in play there. So whenever I hear the buzzword sanctuary city, I just say that's just a repackaging of the concept of jurisdiction. It's just a very old concept and a completely necessary concept. Courts should always be looking at, do we have the power to act? Every court has the power on its own, basically, in every instance to check and see, like, wait, do we have the power to do what we're being asked to do? And that comes up especially in the federal system because they're often asked to do all manner of things, and they are courts of limited subject matter jurisdiction. So it's one of those concepts that's like a fork or a knife in that you use it every day, but then once in a while it becomes really radically politicized, and so it's important to sort of keep the big picture in mind during those moments. One of the things I'm thinking about a lot these days is how important it is to remember what normal looks like and what normal feels like. And so that's why whenever I think about sanctuary city and it drives me up the wall, I think about, okay, the whole package. What's jurisdiction? Why do we have it? What does it look like and feel like when nobody's trying to use it as a political football and it's just a way of courts determining whether they legitimately have the power to act on it? Like, is this a fair use of court order? Yeah.
Henry, when the Supreme Court decides which cases they're going to hear, is it often related to their jurisdiction, or there's probably other factors?
Yeah, I have to assume they do rule on jurisdiction,
Right.
like if there's a conflict between two circuits, for instance. So we've got the district courts doing the trials, and then the circuits are the sort of middle court, the Court of Appeals, and then there's the Supreme Court. That's the federal court system. And so if you have two circuits doing different things, one of them saying, yes, we have this power, it's within our jurisdiction, and another one saying, no, we don't, that's for the states to decide, that would be a good reason for the Supreme Court to grant certiorari and to take the case and to resolve the circuit split.
But that's also one of the reasons why they'll often say, like, no, we're not going to wade into this because this isn't a federal issue.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have to come in and resolve issues at the state level. If the state decides to do something that seems like it contravenes the U.S. Constitution,
Right.
then the U.S. Supreme Court has jurisdiction to determine that. But
Yeah.
if something is specifically a state issue, the courts will, or they'll say this is something that's resolved, or there isn't a matter. There's nothing in this issue that requires us to read into it. So they limit themselves, but I think sometimes it also has to do with who's on the bench, right? I mean,
Yes.
I mean, it's not so much politicized as it's more philosophical, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
they have different ideas of what the court's kind of should be.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
That a little bit, at what level of court can judges say, no, we're not going to hear it? Is it appellate and up, or is it?
A court, I think every court,
In a
Yeah.
trial court,
They can say,
they can say,
throw it out.
we don't have the power to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a famous case that I remember reading in law school where a guy tried to sue Satan. And it sort of made sense. Because if you believe in the devil, he has really been up to some nonsense, right? He's broken many laws and is responsible for a great amount of misery. But in his complaint, this particular plaintiff said specifically that the devil lives on the moon. And the court said, we're not going to say the devil doesn't exist. We're not going to say he hasn't done these things. We're not going to wade into, we're going to take the complaint at its face, which you have to do at that stage. And on its face, it says that this guy lives on the moon, therefore that's beyond our jurisdiction. It's a very graceful way. And he accepted that. He was like, you know what? You're right. Slipped away again. Yes.
So my question is very, very basic since I have not been to law school. I just want to revisit what you said about the sanctuary city, which I know you hate that term,
Yeah.
and the reestablishment of jurisdiction. So are you saying that the cities that have chosen to be sanctuary cities are within their rights as a jurisdiction?
Now that I'm not running for judge, I can tell you that in my opinion, yes, they're within their rights because it's not constitutional for, I mean, this is a contested issue. Reasonable jurists could disagree,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
But I just think that I'm right also.
I don't think you're going to meet a lot of people in this room, Henry, that are going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
I think from like a technical perspective, the idea is that courts can decide what there's different branches of government, right? But like you can decide which laws you want to enforce and how, and what the penalties for those laws will be.
Yes.
And
In most contexts.
Right, in most contexts. In this context, they can do that. You know, like if they say, like, we recognize that this is the law, and we recognize that these people cannot claim the rights of full citizenship. Although even that is like the court has, you know, the Supreme Court has waded into like the rights of human beings within our boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And some would say that that's within reason, but yeah, I mean, I think if a city says we have allocated resources, we we are going to determine within our city boundaries how we're going to use those resources. And we don't think the rounding up of people who work and live in our city and our neighbors is the highest and best use of our resources. They can do that. I mean,
Yeah.
what's interesting, like Henry said, is that for years, southern states all said the exact, that's what they said in the face of Jim Crow. I mean, that's how they
Yeah.
kept Jim Crow perpetuated, right? They were like, it's not worth it to us to have our police force track down and prosecute, you know, the KKK or
Right.
domestic terrorists who are executing acts of racist violence. That was all well and good, but now, you know, it doesn't seem to work. And I think the law is vague, and I think you
Right.
can make an argument in the opposite way, but it's not resolved, and I don't know if this is the time for the court. That's my opinion. So yes, I think you're right.
I will say that I feel very confident that the majority of police chiefs are with me because they understand the practical result of not being a so-called sanctuary city, which is that you've basically made it illegal to call 911 in whole neighborhoods of your city. So already we have a crisis of confidence, for instance, among survivors of sexual violence. The report rates are just so low for enforcement, criminal enforcement there, that to me, it's a crisis. And if we don't see it as a crisis, we can't address it. And when you have whole segments of society who have a reasonable belief, whether it's true or not, that the system just isn't for them, that's really bad. The system runs on people being willing to come in and be witnesses, come in and be jurors, to believe that what a law clerk writes on a sheet of paper and a judge signs and puts their magic seal on is like, oh, that's a law, right? Like, that's magical thinking. But without it, we can't have a government. So that's why in all of the ethical rules that bind everybody working in the system, you have to not only avoid actually doing something wrong, you have to avoid the appearance of doing something wrong. Because the people who wrote the rules understood that if you don't avoid the appearance of doing something wrong, you get all these judges being like, well, I'm right, so I don't care what it looks like. And then people will start disinvesting in the justice system and sort of reinvesting in alternative systems of seeking to like get their grievances dealt with, like beating up their neighbor or like having somebody come by and threaten their neighbor. Or, the alternative systems sometimes are great because it's like community-based justice stuff, and then sometimes it's beating up your neighbor, and that's not as good.
I think the cities that like they have a valid argument too when we're talking about to sanctuary cities, which is immigration laws at the federal level.
Yeah.
So y'all didn't do your job, so why should we come in and take our resources and our cops and have them do your job for you now?
Yeah.
Like you have a line item budget for this. Like you have ICE, you have Border Patrol, and I'm sure like fortifying the nation's borders is not a state issue. That is like squarely within the jurisdiction of the federal
Yeah,
government.
it's absolutely not state law.
And I mean, that's not all the primary reason why sanctuary cities exist. I think it is for more humane reasons and also to like, for the functionality for people to continue to participate. But that's a pretty logical, it's a pretty strong argument, which is like,
Yeah.
why are you telling us? Like, it's your money. You know what I mean? Like,
it's your money, you have way more of it,
and it's your laws.
And it's your laws, we have no say over those laws. And that's also a distinction between the like, we won't prosecute the KKK scenario, because the KKK was violating federal law, but they were also definitely violating state law.
Yeah, murder is state law.
Murder is illegal everywhere. So, like, everything they were doing was super illegal.
Yeah.
Whereas immigrants are not. They're not violating, they're less likely to be violating state law than natural born citizens. So, yes.
Is the sanctuary city thing an actual law? Are they written out things, or is it just something that mayors say, look, we're gonna be a sanctuary city, and it's all kind of common knowledge?
I think it depends on the city. I think there are some cities that have passed like local ordinances, and like the equivalent of whatever their city council, their like legislative body, they've passed that. In some cities it's been a mayor's response. In some cities it's been both.
So really speaking, if it's not a written thing, it's just sort of a stated, this is kind of how we operate in Philadelphia. There is no legal jurisdiction of anything because there's nothing written down,
Well,
right?
there's So what's going to happen is the federal government is going to say, we sent you something saying you have to start doing this, or else we're going to withdraw like all this funding, like crazy amounts of funding.
Okay.
So it's our money, and we can withdraw. We don't owe you that money. So, you know, we give it to you because we can, not because you like have already earned it. Or so if you don't do what we're saying, we're going to take away all the money. Now, the federal government will be very bullish with their interpretation of how much power they have to withdraw funding and whether they can do it in a way that's sort of arbitrary. And there's some case law that goes the other way that says once you've provided funding, you can't be just like completely crazy and arbitrary with the states about withdrawing it. So, yes.
So I have a question. It's a hypothetical one. It's related to the executive order 13780. It's a traffic ban. What would happen if the executive branch proceeds with overstepping the Supreme Court's rule and enforcing rulings or enforcing actions by the Department of Homeland Security? What could potentially happen? Or what would
That's like a scary question. So the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is what if the federal government just straight up ignores the Supreme Court?
Yes.
So I don't know. And that's like a frightening thing even to have to contemplate. You know, what happens if the Supreme Court, for instance, put a stay on something and then Homeland Security was like, no.
Well, I think what we see more often in history is that the court will issue rulings, the Supreme Court will issue rulings, and then the slow to follow will find creative ways to circumvent what the court said. So like a perfect example is Brown versus the Board of Education, you know, said schools have to be segregated, right? I think most of us, if you were born, you know, in 1980 or earlier, you probably understand that even though by law segregation can no longer exist in public schools, that in practice it exists all the time, right? And you know that's done through districting and boundaries and gerrymandering. You know, and you think about like voter suppression, right? So I think that the court can sometimes be a thought leader, and the states and the local governments, because the courts can only issue decisions. The executive branch has the enforcement power,
Yep.
right? So the courts don't have an army or a police force, or you know, they don't have anybody. I mean, they've got their clerks and their pens and pencils. Like they don't have that. They don't have funding for that, so they can't go out. There's no like court police that's going to go out and be like, you Homeland Security, you're not following the law. I think we probably will see some continued circumvention of whatever the court ultimately decides. It's not new.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that makes it really scary here, like Henry said earlier, is that in the past, the executive branch at the federal level has tried to poo-poo Congress and the courts and been like, I don't have to listen to you. But they've at least been creative in how they do it.
Yes,
right?
they've
Like,
tried
these
to
are going to
keep
say to your
pace,
face, like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, you know, they're not flying in the face of that. Like, there's at least an effort to look like they're complying with our system of checks and balances. This is a big unknown because we have an executive branch, not only who doesn't respect the court system, but I truly don't think they understand the judicial system. Like, I don't think that the White House understands the Constitution. I don't think anyone there's read it. I don't think they understand judicial, I don't think they understand any of it. So that's like scary. I agree with Henry. But I would also say that like in the past, if you think about it, just because the court says something doesn't mean that we follow suit immediately. I mean, we saw that even after the Overgeld decision, right? I mean, there's still states and localities that are still trying to fight the legalization or recognition of same-sex marriage. It comes down to whether or not the executives in the states are going to say, no, we're going to listen to what the Supreme Court said. We're not going to listen to the White House. The White House doesn't know anything.
Yes.
I have another question too about sanctuary city
Sure.
issue. So in a state like Texas where the governor said, well, so Austin said, okay, we're going to make sanctuary city, and the governor says, we're going to withdraw, support. So in that case, how does it all play out?
I would have to know a little bit about Texas law, honestly, to address that, because at every level and in every system, there's going to be friction between different jurisdictions. And so a city is one size of jurisdiction and the state is another, and one of the interesting things about the United States is that states are free in their own constitutions to give broader power than the U.S. Constitution. They're just not allowed to like go below the level. So the U.S. Constitution sort of sets a basement as incorporated against the states. It's a basement, but some states have interpreted their constitutions to give individuals more rights, or they might have a constitution that gives cities more rights, or they might do something like Colorado did in the gay rights case that was before Lawrence, but I can't remember. It was after Bowers, but before Lawrence. I can't remember the name.
I can't remember either.
But there was of course, Boulder, Colorado is an anomaly in some ways in Colorado, and they were passing all of these ordinances that were like, you know, animals have equal status to people. You know, they would just do like Boulder. I lived there for a while, and I have great affection for it. It's like a real laboratory of democracy kind of place. But they also passed a lot of earlier, queer equality stuff. And so the state of Colorado tried to make that illegal for local jurisdictions to give rights to people who were in same-sex relationships beyond what the state. And that was stricken because it was obviously done for like malicious reasons, and so basically that's what the Supreme Court said. You can't straight up target people just out of malice. So that was one of those like basement things. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. It's like not a great answer because I don't know much about how those jurisdictions interact in their own system, which is probably different from us because we're one of the older ones and they're like a little newer. There's sort of like almost generational differences in the states as you go west in terms of like how long their constitutions are going to be, how much they resemble the U.S. Constitution, in terms of like water law and how they're going to do that stuff, and sort of some basic property law stuff. It kind of gets different as you go. So let me see what else I have for you guys here. It's good stuff. So yeah, jurisdiction is just a fancy way to say power to act, and they're always having to look at whether they have the power to act in the specific circumstances of the case before them. So I had printed out some statistics and then I didn't put it in my bag, so I wasted 40 pages printing printouts for no good reason, but I'm going to put them, something to you. So they'll end up on Facebook.
Yeah, an action network.
And so the stats I want to give you are just some like annual reports. Sounds pretty fun. It is pretty fun. About, there's one for the federal system, and then there's one within Pennsylvania. And I just grabbed, each county does their own reporting here. So I just grabbed 2015 for Philadelphia and for Allegheny, which is where Pittsburgh is. I thought that was probably the closest exemplar we're going to get, given that they have to apply all the same laws. And, you know, the environments are roughly similar. So I did write down at least this part. This is just really wild to me. In 2015, in the criminal courts, Philly had 93.2% of its cases were felony and 6.7 were misdemeanor. In Allegheny, 61.6%, so over half were misdemeanors and only 38.1% were felonies. So completely different. Completely different. Couldn't be more different. There are some things you can look at and kind of see why. They have way more DUI prosecutions. Like we had 300 some and they had 4,000 some, I think, when we were looking at it. So that's, I don't know if people are like driving much more, if it's like the LA of Pennsylvania or what's going on. I don't know, do we have any
Philadelphia County is really the city, and I think
Yeah, it
a lot of people use public transportation
And
here, right?
yes.
And maybe Allegheny County has more suburbs, I don't know.
Yeah,
And they don't have a very public ground.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that probably contributes. But still, that disparity seems really wild to me.
But what's the disparity in ethnic distribution and racial distribution?
I haven't looked at that. That would
I'd be
be,
interested in mapping those two things out to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
definitely. It's the kind of thing that would be interesting to talk about with Mr. Fassner. I don't know, just to get his take. So one of the things that has happened over the past 30 years that's been a big trend is the rise of the plea agreement as by far the primary way in which criminal cases are disposed. So one of the things that is sort of that bothers me about the system is if we're having over 90% of criminal cases that make it past sort of early charging, is there enough to hold them stage, end up in a plea, then why is it taking us so long to schedule trials? It would seem like our judges would just be like sitting around being like, oh my God, give me a trial. Like, we have all these pleas. It's just like boom, boom, boom. But that's not the way it is. We have some of the longest pretrial incarceration times in the country. And so it's something that we're working on. We got a MacArthur grant, I think, for it. And so that's a good thing. And it's on everybody's radar. But it still doesn't answer this question, which is that if so many cases are being resolved in plea deals, why can't we get trials scheduled really quickly? And my guess would be that the overall share of the budget that is going to the courts versus the other systems hasn't been keeping pace with the growth of population and prosecution and the amount of cases that are coming through. And so even though you're having more cases resolved in this less time-intensive way, the system just hasn't grown as quickly as the need. So that would be my guess, but I would have to look way more closely at all sorts of factors in order to justify. It's really a hunch. So, but there are a lot of interesting questions like this, and one of the other websites that I will send to you is measuresforjustice.org, which is a project of somebody named Amy Bach, who is looking at comparing different jurisdictions to see how they size up and what the disparities tell us. So if you have two counties next to each other and you look at the conviction rates, and one of them has like a 92% conviction rate and the next one has like a 42% conviction rate, you might wonder like, what's going on here? And it's not as if there's a right answer, like a sort of platonic ideal of like 96% is what we want. You know, it's just enough to let us know that the fix isn't in, but for the most part, they're not prosecuting nonsense cases, right? Like, I don't know what the right answer is, but when you have a disparity that's that big, and sometimes you do, it's suggestive that maybe one or both jurisdictions needs to tweak it a little bit. So those are interesting things for us to think about as a democracy. You know, what do we want? What do we want this to look like? So, the story of Brown versus Board of Ed is a great one to tell when we're thinking about what we want the courts to look like, because a lot of things went right in that case. You get lawyers who are working very hard and are being very patient and have a goal in mind and a population in mind that they're really listening to, and that they're getting to know people and really building networks, and they take all the steps right and they don't force it, and they get a really good plaintiff, and then they make the right case. So the goal was to attack segregation more broadly and to figure out, well, how do we come at this? What's the right angle? And the right angle was kids. To say, you know, kids are different and we need to take some more responsibility here and fix the problem of sort of like their future and their opportunities. It's not, this is radically unfair because of the way it affects kids. And so at the time, if you were sort of like a good leftist, you could say to yourself, well, of course I want to desegregate schools, but if we do it in the wrong way, or if we do it too quickly, the kids who are coming from families of color, they're much more likely to be coming from a poor family, from a family where the parents don't have books around, maybe are not literate, and so they're already at a disadvantage. And if we put them all together, that structural disadvantage may manifest itself in them not doing as well in school. And because of that, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that they'll want to perform. And so you could sort of say, like, I'm not a bad person. I think, you know, if you horse it, it could be bad for the very people we're trying to help. That was like a very, you know, if you were like a 70-year-old white guy who wanted to feel like you were a good person, but was afraid, that was a way to sort of come up with the superstructure of why you're not awful. And what the litigants, one of the things that the litigants did in Brown v. Board of Ed, the lawyers did, but I thought was important and that I focus on as a lawyer is they took the voices of the people they were trying to help, and they made those voices louder. And that's what a democracy should do, and that's what the working organs of a democracy should do. So you have the Clark-Doll study. Has anybody heard of the Clark-Doll study? Probably, yeah, but okay, Clark-Doll study. So they had dolls that were basically identical except for the color of plastic. And they asked kids, they let kids play with the dolls, and then they asked them a bunch of questions, like which one is nice, which one is pretty, stuff like that. And the end result was, it just became very clear that like the message of discrimination was not lost on these 6-year-old kids, like they got it. And so you couldn't say to yourself, we're sparing them harm by keeping them separate. It became clear that we are harming them as a society by enforcing a racial hierarchy that is completely legible to a 6-year-old kid. Like they get it. And so by magnifying the voices of these, like the most vulnerable person, the most vulnerable citizen in our whole country is like a 6-year-old child of color. And you take that citizen's voice and make it louder. And at every stage it gets a little louder. And clerks write it up right, so that you're really magnifying that voice and not making it about this other theory or about this other case law, but about this is the lived experience of the citizen, and we cannot deny the truth of this. That's how you get a 9-0. And that's the power of the truth, right? When it works, and it works well, not only do you get the right decision, but you get a 9-0. And that's the kind of victory that makes for a real sea change. So that's one of the things that I'm returning to a lot as I try to like reassure myself that this is a thing that we can do. We've done it before, and we can do it again.
I have a question. Obviously, the Supreme Court and the nomination and the confirmation of Justice Gorsuch was a big blow for those of us on the left. Somewhere America is still waiting for this. But there's been a lot of talk about stacking the court and the fact that the court is incredibly polarized, and there's this perception of that. And I try to tell people that that's not necessarily true, like court composition. So, based on like your knowledge and looking back, like how polarized has the court been in the past, or is this something that's like really like a huge concern? But should we be that worried about how this is going?
There are definitely times when it's been pretty polarized. You probably remember from law school the switch in time that saved the 9.
Yeah.
So that was the court was not down with the New Deal, and so the federal the president was like, oh, you don't like that? Well, there's not going to be 9 of you anymore. I'm going to appoint like 4 more, and then we'll see what's what. So that was enough. You know, it's like when we were talking before about whether the U.S. Marshals are going to have to like go arrest ICE or something if there's an order that the courts have filed that then they violate. I think the court is always aware that if it gets ahead of itself and then it's just flouted, that's going to be a huge blow, not only for the court but for the country. To sort of visibly fall into that level of lawlessness would be extremely corrosive. Corrosive in a way that it goes beyond Bush v. Gore, and Bush v. Gore was pretty corrosive. So I think, just like in a marriage, I think they choose their battles.
I always like to tell people when they worry about that Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia were the best of friends. Like they're
so weird.
Ideologically completely different. Like you have a woman who literally spent her entire adult life, pushing for gender equality and equality, for everyone, and had a very liberal and very progressive interpretation of what the Constitution is. And with a man who famously said, "My Constitution is dead." Like he was not interested in, expanding anything beyond the four corners. He's a fantastic jurist, a brilliant jurist, but very. Conservative doesn't even describe who Justice Scalia was as a person. But they used to drink with each other and rode on an elephant up a hill in India and used to get kind of salty with each other. They were really good friends. The reason why she fell asleep that day at the State of the Union is because she drank wine at his house and nodded up. They do find ways to be. I do think at its core, the people who serve on the court and courts in general do understand that it's a tremendous responsibility and that it is not a position that's meant to be political, that it is an intellectual and philosophical position, and I think they do see it through. And I don't agree with anything that Justice Gorsuch stands for as a jurist, but by all accounts, he is somebody who I think does respect the value of this position. Whether what he chooses to do with it remains to be seen. So I do think that they themselves do kind of, but there's always warning signs, and you kind of have to.
Yeah, that's the truth. The other thing I would say about the polarization on the court is that it's often polarized in ways that you wouldn't expect based on the issue. So sometimes you have like the conservatives taking a small government approach to a search and seizure case, whereas a lot of the leftists on the court are former ADAs or AUSAs. And so they think first of like, oh, wouldn't it be a pain in the butt if I were still a prosecutor and I had to deal with a ruling that said I couldn't put just a little GPS thing under the bumper? What's the big deal? That's not that invasive. So sometimes you get these 5-4s that you wouldn't expect. And that's, even though it's still a 5-4, it's sort of reassuring, right? Because it means that they're not in these solid blocks that are always just reacting based on, oh, I'm on team R and they're on team D and this is what it is. But it's very much issue driven and about their jurisprudence, their vision of how this is supposed to work, how this is all supposed to work. And even if they don't, they all at least think they do have an overall theory of how this is all supposed to work, and are trying to be consistent from case to case and even from amendment to amendment in terms of how they're applying the law, so that their own words can't be used against them in a subsequent argument, which is fun when you're the lawyer and you get to be like, but you said that. So a few of the other things I wanted to talk about, and then we should definitely just like have questions and or discuss and or drink wine. One of the other big trends that we have to be cognizant of is that there's this group called the Federalist Society. Do you want to describe the Federalist Society?
No, I'll let you.
Okay, I'm enjoying the. So the Federalist Society is basically a sort of right libertarian-ish organization that has chapters in like all the law schools, and they offer CLEs. They do. I've been to their like local year in SCOTUS roundup, and it's always very good. But they're definitely like a right-wing group, and one of their goals, in addition to making sure everybody gets their CLE every year, is just to take over the courts. To get young, sort of libertarian to authoritarian-ish, but right-wing people into all of the court systems, state and federal, all over the place. And they've been very effective at that. And so sometimes I think the problem is vision. It's a question of vision. And if we can't sort of match them in terms of offering a cognizant, or a coherent, is the word I'm going for, vision of how things are supposed to work, whether that's talking to people about how healthcare could be and making it something that people can understand and that makes sense to them. I mean, the thing that's annoying about death tax, sanctuary city, nanny state, all of these right-wing buzzwords is that they tell a very quick, easy narrative. And even though they're usually false, because quick, easy narratives are not how life works, they just communicate a vision very clearly that people can then use to explain away huge swaths of complex human interaction. And then we are always coming along and being like, actually, let me give you this 8-page document that's just an executive summary. Every page has 1 million footnotes and links, and just read that and all the footnotes, and then you'll understand why you're wrong. And that just somehow doesn't work as well.
Well, I think it's hard to be pithy and speak in like, one side, because there's that idea of like the human condition is complex, right?
Yeah, and it should be.
When you're trying to move the needle forward for people in general, and you're trying to take into consideration the different needs and concerns and disadvantages that various people have, and trying to find a way to improve the human condition for everyone, that is messy. Mm-hmm. It's complicated. It can be at times adversarial, but that's a hard thing to like have a sentence or like a chant that you can put up on social media or taunt people with, right? So it's like it's always this is not a new thing, right? But like when you think about like the Federalist Society, one of the things that I think that they do well and the right has done well, is that they're big on indoctrination. And I think one of the ways that you counterbalance that, like not just from the perspective of the law and the courts and like what you do every day, which is very important, you know, this is the last law, like this is the bastion against, you know, this insanity, is this, right? So like if you understand things and you make it a point to never let anyone keep you a low information voter,
Yes.
to never let anyone deny your reality, and to never let anyone tell you what they think is the best solution for you, then you don't have to worry about the Federalist Society. Like they are bullies. Like that's always been my perception of them. They take this very narrow approach to things, and instead of just being like that's wrong, they have these very subversive sort of like backhanded ways of undermining, and that's never going to move the needle forward for anyone, right? Even the people who think that they're in power, like ultimately, like you're still somebody's stooge. You just don't know it. Like, you know what I mean? And so I think we have a messaging problem. I agree with that. But I'd still rather be me.
Oh yeah.
You know?
I agree
And
with that.
I think that this is what we're doing is I think, because democracy is messy.
It is.
You know, and I think anyone that went back and read anything that the Founding Fathers read, including those Federalist Society people and read the Federalist Papers, they would understand that that's what they warned us about constantly. You know, like the human condition is such that it's going to be messy. And you're not going to get where you want to be. And it's not linear. Progress is not linear. You know what I mean? Like we've made amazing progress in certain regards, you know, and then we've taken huge steps back. And that's not necessarily limited just to like the current regime or like previous, you know, conservative administrations. I mean, that's just true.
Yeah.
Because that's people,
Yep.
you know?
And I think because it's messy, that's why we have the checks and balances in place to help protect us from the mess, you know?
Yes.
To help protect us from too much messiness.
Too much messiness and too many easy answers on the other hand too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to take a different position.
Democracy.
And I want to bring it back to the court system. The one thing that I have always admired about the Republican Party is they frame the argument. And they use Madison Avenue tactics. And the progressive and democratic side, I think we're kind of mired in, we're doing the right thing so we can explain this long thing. And even during the primary, the one thing, because I am trained actually on the Madison Avenue side and in framing, like when we're talking about mass incarceration, most people don't even know what that means. But if I'm talking to somebody, especially an African American, I say, neither is he locking up a whole bunch of black guys. They go, oh yeah, right away. And you hook them. And we don't know how to hook people. It's like our argument may be great, but people have very short attention spans. They have a lot going on in their personal lives. And we have to get to the point. So when we're talking about the courts, because they're very complex, and I mean, you have legal training, and you know, to talk to people who have no legal training. You know, the average Philadelphia reads on like a 5th grade reading level. We have to make it simple and digestible and relatable. And so we have to learn how to do that. Even though we have all this backstory, that helps inform, but we got to keep it real simple. And most of us are even influenced by, you know, a quick 30-second ad. Like, I need those shoes. You know,
It's true, and that's a democratic commitment
Right.
to say, you know, sometimes I think as the left, we let ourselves off a little bit easy because it's like, well, we know we're right and that our complex answers are correct, so we don't have to say it in a way that tries to reach everybody. It's almost like letting yourself have like a sort of beautiful failure of a dramatic arc instead of like winning for everyone.
Yeah, because winning does feel really good.
Yes, especially when we're all doing it together. Yes.
So I'm gonna just give, I think that's a very good point, but I'm gonna give a counter to it. The fact that I feel like, I personally believe that the messaging coming from the Republican side has been a message that has stood through history. It's been here for so long, and it's seeded through so many different generations and different cultures. Whereas the Democratic message of equality for all and minorities and these type of messages that I believe is the bottom line issue in this election that people didn't consider consider. People found top-line reasons to cling on to whichever party they chose, and we saw the outcome. I feel like that's a newer message, or a less heard message that you have to kind of repeat over and over and in different ways in order for it to become more ingrained in that deep-seated way that the Republican message has been. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I grew up in a tiny rural Massachusetts town, which Massachusetts is a blue state, but I say that if you're outside of Boston, it's easy to say you're blue and accept everyone when everyone looks like you. And I didn't look like everyone, so I believe I had internalized racism. That's something that we don't talk about, and I don't think I felt free to talk about it until this election brought out an entirely different way of looking at that bottom line tolerance issue that I don't think was addressed prior to this election, in the outcome of this election. So I wonder if, yeah, we need to find a simpler message as an overall statement, but there's still layers that we need to talk about that haven't been addressed as a nation.
Well, I agree with, we have to open the door. So you have to go, oh, and then you can go into,
Right.
sometimes you'll stand there and talk to somebody for 30 minutes who are like, yeah, I don't have time, and then you hook them.
That's true.
And then they'll listen to it.
I have a friend who, so New Hampshire being the swing state that I'm 5 minutes, my parents are 5 minutes from the border of New Hampshire. I have a really good friend who voted independent in this election. And I didn't know that until after the election. When I got into this, I thought that in this election it was personal opinion. I think it's unethical in a swing state to have voted independent because you're saying you're okay with either outcome, knowing that your independent vote doesn't impact which way your state leans in the electoral votes. And so we got to this debate. All of his friends voted for Trump. And so we got to this argument, a white male from New Hampshire, who the only person that's not white that he's ever met in his life is me. And I asked him if you had woken up the next day and Trump had won the election because of New Hampshire with a few votes, would you feel differently? And after a few months of that statement, he's come and told me that he would vote differently if he could do it over again. So I think, like, how do you get that story or that message across? I mean, I think this election's given us those conversations and those dialogues, but it's deeper. So he's not bigoted, he's not racist, he's a really good friend of mine, I genuinely believe that, but he doesn't cut it the way I cut it, because he's never lived the life I've lived or experienced the things that a lot of people who have lived in Philadelphia, regardless of race or gender or anything, have seen, just because we're exposed to it and he hasn't been. So that's sort of the conflict I struggle with, is how do we bring it outside of a place like here, and how do we simplify it in a way that's going to counter this deep-seated mentality of just propaganda that, like, I bought into as a youth. So
How do you convince people to care about other people?
Yeah.
That's fundamentally
Well, they haven't to see it. I guess that's the difference. You don't know that you don't care until you've seen it, right? Or until you've experienced it, or at least seen it and listened to it. So how do we get people who haven't to see that? I mean, I have a friend from work who we've had repeated conversations. He moved here from Texas in like December. So guess who he voted for? Because he feels like voting is a necessity, and he didn't know enough about each candidate, and his state's red. He just bought into the propaganda and voted for Trump. Now, in hindsight, living here, he's like, I have no idea how I did what I did. But it's interesting how, because he was never exposed to it, and small town Louisiana, moved to Texas, and now is in the Northeast and finally exposed to this. It's just how do we make sure, even in a state like New Hampshire, that's a swing state, someone can still not have seen it, you know, or it's so close to Massachusetts, which is such a liberal state.
I would bring it even a little closer to this new race between the BA. We have Republican and we have Democrat. And right now, I think for the first time that the Democrats really don't have, even though it's 7-to-1 voter registration, but I think this election is still in danger. Because when you said, how do you frame it? You know, you look at generations of all the stuff they're putting out there, but I don't think the Democrats, as you were saying, are framing it correctly in that 30-second catch and saying, okay, this is what we're talking about. So I think that's something that I think that's relevant to right now, that catching or that framing of this issue.
Did anyone see that slogan that came out on the Democrats 2018 survey?
Yeah.
Have you seen the other guys?
Go ahead, Lily.
Oh, okay. I mean, talking about messaging, people do not realize it. Like, I grew up in the literal whitest city in the country at the time, just for context. And it's invisible. It's like, you know rationally that there are probably bugs in the basement, but you don't see them, so you don't think about it, and it's not a problem. And so I swear down every week, I see at least 3 posts from my uber diehard writings on my Facebook feed, where it's a picture of a sick child. Oh, please pray for this child. I'm like, you want to take away the kid's health care?
what's the matter with you? And it's not even necessarily a matter. I've gotten to the point where I'm putting out the warning, if you're cheering the new healthcare bill and you share one of those goddamn pictures, I'm just going to start screaming at you on Facebook because that's all I can do at this point. But the point is, how do you make people aware of that? Because they think to themselves, I am a good person. I care about other people. And when you're saying how do you make people care about other people, well, one of those things where I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. Like, why should you care about other people? Because you should. And I can't believe I had to have this conversation with someone in their 50s. I mean, and I don't have the answer, unfortunately, is how do you connect that? And I think that's where the layers come in. And I understand it's a framing issue and a messaging issue because I have relatives who scream judicial activism all day long. No idea what it is. They know it's bad. They don't like it. But they know it's bad.
They knew how passive judges really were.
Yeah.
They're so
I
passive.
mean, and it's when the majority is done well. They make it about one short soundbite and then connect it to something visceral. And it's not something they do well. And they should do well at that.
So, I mean, I'm just, like, go back to what you guys were saying, because I'm like way back there. How about the successes of the left? Because we have had successes. We elected Barack Obama 8 years ago. That was a huge success. Was it about campaign? Was it what you said? Was it Madison Avenue? Was it his, you know, his great one word, you know, because that's what he did. That's how he got elected, right? So I tend to I feel like the left and the progressives have a huge self-esteem problem right now because there is no reason we can't do this. We have done this before. ACT UP did it in the 90s. I mean, it is about
Nobody had it
messaging.
worse than ACT UP. Like,
yeah.
In recent political history, like, if you were a gay man with AIDS in 1982, like,
Yeah.
wow.
Maybe that's okay. But they
tough.
did, and they kept fighting.
Well, we did, yes, we did. And it is about sitting down and messaging. And so I feel like we do have the power, and we're allowing them to take our power from us. So that's all I want to throw in there.
But I've had the opportunity to target on Trump voters. It's not that hard. And because the one thing is that I really like to do in my line of work is that you put yourself in the other person's shoes. And so I have to think from their perspective. And, you know, at the bottom line, everybody basically wants the same thing. Everybody wants to be happy, or they pay their bills, whatever. But it's the way they frame it. And if you go at them, like in 2013, I helped write a script and actually, you know, pick who they were going to talk to in Western Pennsylvania and Middle Pennsylvania about healthcare. And I said, do not say Obama, do not say the president. We're going to frame it working families. I mean, those people flipped. And literally it was, hold on, we're going to transfer you right to your state representative. And they were just falling like, you know, like dominoes. And I was like, why would the Democratic Party embrace the word Obamacare? That's the opposite of what would actually work. So I think maybe, not to take away from your presentation, in another setting that we could sit down and talk about like what's productive language even within the Democratic Party, because everybody's not a progressive, and how we can start framing conversations to actually get different people who don't think exactly like us to kind of hear our message.
Can you come to the one next Sunday? Talk about the board and the democratic political system in the city, and I think that's really important.
She's coming to that, aren't you?
Yeah.
I haven't signed up yet, but sure.
Well, you're coming now.
Why don't I just give one quick anecdote and then I'll just wrap up and we can all, because you guys have exceeded my expertise to such a degree that I'm, you know, embarrassed to sit in front of you. It's such a good conversation. I just want to end on a hopeful note, which is I started law school in 2002, and my first semester in law school, because I was one of the queer kids, I got pulled into Blue Book, which is glorified proofreading, an amicus brief in Lawrence v. Texas. And our brief got cited in the main opinion, the majority opinion. I was over the moon, so that was like in my summer, the late end of my first summer job.
Lawrence v. Texas was the sodomy case, where the Supreme Court finally said that, you know, like anti-sodomy laws were like unconstitutional, but they went far enough to extend that the rights and the privileges and the I guess that the 14th Amendment applied to people, and that they didn't go so far as to say that people who identify as queer are a protected class, but they fell just short of that. And it's what laid, I think, the groundwork for marriage equality. But just a lot of things, even beyond just like the space of talk about queer activism.
Yeah,
I can do
it
for
was
you.
really important, and they could have taken a more modest stance and said you're not allowed to have anti-sodomy laws that discriminate in terms of gender. But if you ban sodomy for everyone, straight or gay couples,
Then it's fine.
then it's fine. And they didn't. They want to step beyond that, which was important and allowed us to build very quickly. So that's 2002. I graduated in 2005. By that time, Gavin Newsom was already marrying people. So that was real quick. And the momentum really didn't slow down after that. We had this intense public discussion, basically, this huge dialogue between people and the courts and the voting booth about the status of a group of citizens. And we do this again and again and again. We're always relitigating the terms of citizenship. You can look at the Dreyfus Affair in France, historically, which is, one Jewish officer in the military. And the whole country argued over whether, are we going to be a country, about French blood or a country of liberty, equality, and fraternity? Which is it? And so this is constantly being relitigated all the time in every democracy, and so we should just expect that we're always going to be doing this with some group of people. It appears that transgender people are going to be part of the next round of, sort of public litigation. We're going to be talking a lot about immigrants when we talk about civil rights. But this is it's so much of a part of democracy that it's a norm. And the vast majority of the resources that get put into it aren't about this specific group of people. Like the vast majority of resources that were poured into marriage equality were poured in by straight people. Not even close. And the vast majority of religious organizations that put time and money into that were on the right side. So we should always remember that.
Yeah. I always remember, because I graduated in law in 2005 too. If you ever need to remember the crazy insanity that is politics, the law, culture and all of that, and then just kind of be why don't people just get it? Go back and read the state Supreme Court opinion in Massachusetts that legalized same-sex marriages, the Goodrich decision. And there's a passage in that where the judge sort of breaks a little bit of precedent, because a lot of times in these judicial opinions in these court, they're very technical, they're throwing around sort of specific terms. But he talks about I think he says, and it's paraphrasing it, we should all be so lucky that we have quality people like that are in our lives. People who want to create a family and who want to, contribute and be a part of the society. And for us to actively go out and try to prevent people from doing that based on something so arbitrary is a disservice to all of us. But that decision, I remember when I read that, I was this is why I went to law school, because I could do this, I could help somebody do this. So there are silver linings, for sure, but you gotta stay woke.
Yeah. All right. We should all talk to one another, I think. Thank you all so much, but I'm losing my voice, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you.